Good morning. We still have a few people gathering. I'm sorry we're running just a couple minutes late. KPTV came to do a live broadcast, so we didn't want to lose that opportunity, but it did mean giving a few minutes of the opening. So I want to welcome everyone this morning on behalf of Susan G. Komen. Great to see faces that I've known from my career in the audience, as well as so many of the survivors I've had the opportunity to talk with. Today is about gaining knowledge, finding support, and feeling empowered. So those are the important words that are going to guide our day. This is our 17th annual conference. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Margaret Klein. I'm still getting very used to my new last name. I've only been married 5 weeks today. So I keep, thank you. I keep introducing myself by my old last name. So I'm the Director of Programs and Operations for Susan G. Komen, and it's really wonderful to see so many of you this morning. Not only do we have all of you in the room, but we're doing live broadcast sites in Bend at St. Charles, in Roseburg at the Community Cancer Center, and in Medford at the Providence Health Services Center there. So just a warm welcome to each of you. As you can imagine, this is a considerable undertaking, and it would not be possible for our sponsors. We specifically want to connect with them. Many of them are in the exhibit room. I hope you'll have a chance to visit with them. Our presenting sponsor is Moda Health, who joins us for a second year. Our champion sponsor is Kaiser Permanente. Our faith sponsors are Pacific Power and the OHSU Knight Cancer Center. And then our media sponsor is iHeartMedia, especially K103, who offered many interviews with us, and 106.7, KPTV, and then the Oregonian. So the purpose of this conference is really to provide each of you with the most current science-based information on risk reduction, treatment options, and survivorship. As you'll find with our keynote speaker, it's also about finding humor in the midst of adversity, and our closing session is really about continuing to find hope. But it's also about building community and offering each of you a sense of connection and that sense of hope. The Breast Cancer Issues Conference reviews prior conference evaluations, so I want to encourage you to complete those at the end of the day, and then brainstorms with our medical advisory committee to really identify topics that are both interesting and pertinent that will meet the needs you have as attendees, and that you would find most useful on your own personal journey with breast cancer as a survivor or as a healthcare professional. I'm hopeful you'll find the topics this year to be helpful and useful to you. We also are very appreciative at being able to provide continuing education credits, again, for nurses, social workers, counselors and psychologists, physical and occupational therapists, as well as imaging technologists. If you did not check in at time of registration with the CE desk, I want to encourage you to do so to make sure that you are going to get your credits. And the imaging technologists have some very specific guidelines that they need to follow. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, Lily Shockney, I would like just to take care of a few housekeeping matters. So please make sure, and I have to do this myself, that your cell phone is either turned off or it's on vibrate. But before you do so, if you haven't checked in on Facebook, I want to encourage you to do that. And or if you're live tweeting, the hashtag is #KomenBCI. So I want to encourage you to do that as well during the course of the day. Please note that the keynote room, so this is our ballroom where you're at now, will also be used for lunch. So there is a half-hour break before lunch that you'll be able to actually, it'll be a time that you'll be able to talk with Lily. She'll have a book signing, as well as network and be in the exhibits. Schedule for the location of the breakout sessions is on the front of your folder. Some will take place here, and actually the live simulcast sessions are all going to be here. Others are going to be in the Executive Conference Center, and then there are sessions that are upstairs as well. There'll be volunteers available to help guide you to those places, and there's also guidepost signs. Be sure to visit the exhibitors. There's 30 to choose from this year. We also have an area for both merchandise, and we are doing something new this year about telling your story. And so we'll have someone from the staff and volunteers who are available to video you, as well as to have your own portrait taken. We were very fortunate this year that we had a professional photographer by the name of Greg Witcherly, who has donated his time to do this. As I mentioned, Lily will be doing a book signing, which will be in an area where the coffee was. It's just past that. And those will be in the break immediately after this and the break immediately before lunch. I mentioned the merchandise. It's a new addition for us, so make sure you check that out. And I said there was videos, so if you want those to be played, we're happy to post those on our Facebook site, but it's mainly to help tell the story. I think some of you are familiar. In October, we did a profile that was the 31 faces of breast cancer, and many of those came from stories that were told here at the conference. Both of these activities are being held in the room that's right behind this room that you can access, so it's easy to find. I mentioned that to be sure to do your evaluations, but also based on feedback, we've extended the breaks to 30 minutes. So it used to be 15, and some of the comments were we really didn't have enough time to network, and we needed just some rest time. And so the session today ends at 4, and that's because we've added those 15 minutes to each of the break sessions. So Susan G. Komen is really privileged to be able to serve as a leader in breast cancer awareness and advocacy in our community. The states of Oregon and Washington have some of the highest rates of breast cancer, and each week in our state, 70 women and men will hear those words that many of you have heard, "You have breast cancer," and in the same week, another 10 will die from this dreadful disease. The promise of Susan G. Komen is to save lives and end breast cancer forever by empowering people, ensuring quality of care for all, and really energizing science to find cures that will end breast cancer. In the 23 years that Komen, Oregon has been here, we've provided more than $30 million to fund research. That was $11.5 million. And nearly $19.2 million has been funded or has provided funding for community programs and services to support early detection, survivor support, and advocacy for underserved populations. A key element of our survivor support program is the privilege to be able to hold this important event. So now, on today's schedule. So it is my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Lily Shockney. Ms. Shockney is the Administrative Director of Johns Hopkins Avon Breast Center, an Associate Professor at Johns Hopkins, a practicing oncology nurse, and likely most important, a 2-time breast cancer survivor. She has heard the words, "You have breast cancer," not once, but twice. She has both survived and ultimately she has thrived through her journey. She is the author of 14 books and the recipient of countless accolades for her groundbreaking work in helping breast cancer patients face the diagnosis with courage, honesty, and laughter. Ms. Shockney eloquently states in her book, and if you haven't seen it, we do have them available, and it's just so many, but I'm talking about stealing second base. But she eloquently states in her book, "I will always encourage people to hold tight to their faith and to their sense of humor as they take on whatever lies ahead of them, related to breast cancer or any other life-threatening illness." She relates having a plaque on the wall of her home that states, "Laughter is God's hands on the shoulder of a troubled world." A fitting perspective as Ms. Shockney now takes us on a journey through her talk, Finding Humor Where You Least Expected, a nurse's personal journey with breast cancer. Please join with me in welcoming Lily Shockney.
Thank you.
That's so hard. Thanks for coming.
I had no idea we had a newlywed in our midst. How exciting is that? So good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see this room full of people and to also know that through the camera, there's other rooms full of people So you're reaching and connecting and networking and making that possible for a very, very large number of individuals today, and I think that's pretty exciting. So I'm going to take you on a journey with me through some of my experiences with breast cancer. And in order to do that, we have to go back in time, back to when I was 12, because that's how old I was when I first knew someone who had been diagnosed with this disease. That someone was my other mother. That was my mother's best friend, and her name was Miss Bertha. Now, Miss Bertha was a well-educated woman. She was a psychologist, but she didn't know the warning signs of a breast health problem. This was long before we had anything in women's magazines. There was certainly nothing on television about breast cancer. Breast cancer was a hushed disease 50 years ago. We didn't talk about it in public, and actually we rarely discussed it even in private. She had an open draining sore on her breast and a mass the size of a softball for more than a year before she saw her doctor. And she only went then because she said, "My ribs are so sore here. I must be getting arthritis at an early age." She was 54. She said, "I'm going to see my doctor and ask for arthritis ointment." She saw her doctor. He immediately got her into the hands of an oncologist that day who did a series of tests. And he told her that she had advanced metastatic breast cancer, that her ribs were sore because the disease was in her ribs. It was also in her spine, in her right hip, it was in her liver, and it was in her lungs. And he said, "I'm going to treat you aggressively because you've asked me to." But he says, "The fact of the matter is, I don't think you're going to live more than 5 months. So the best thing you can do for yourself is go home and get your affairs in order." He wasn't exactly a warm, fuzzy oncologist. And she looked back at him and she said, "I understand what you're telling me, but today I won't have time to get my affairs in order. And frankly, most of my affairs are in order. I'm a good planner." But she said, "I'm not going to do any more with that today because I'm going to be too busy living. I made a list of the personal goals I intend to achieve before I leave this world. And at this moment, I've decided to add another goal. And that goal, mister, is to outlive you," her doctor. Miss Bertha lived for 21 more years. It was truly a miracle. Her doctor died 18 years later. She did not assist him with his death. He had a heart attack all by himself. But she did attend his funeral and came to our house afterwards. And she said, when I got out there to the grave site and the priest is saying ashes to ashes, dust to dust, I started giggling. And she said, there was a woman standing next to me, and she says, "You're being very inappropriate." And she said, I said to her, "It's something private between him and me, and you really wouldn't understand." Miss Bertha taught me some very important lessons at that impressionable age of 12. She said it's important to have a good medical team that are specialists that know how to take care of this disease. She said it's also important to have life goals because when we have them, we have a better probability of reaching them, and she's right about that. And she said, I also want to make sure that I find something to laugh about every single day because I think laughter will help rebuild my immune system. And I think something went wrong with my immune system to allow cancer cells to grow. She was almost 40 years ahead of research that's been done to prove that Miss Bertha was right. Every time you have a genuine belly laugh, your body is producing T cells. It's the T cells that are our cancer-fighting cells. We've also learned through research in the last 18 months that there's something called telomeres in our body, and we don't want anyone to shorten our telomeres. I'm actually having a t-shirt made that says, "Don't shorten my telomeres." We want to keep our telomeres long because they also stunt the growth of breast cancer cells. And again, one of the ways to do that is through laughter. When we're under a great deal of acute stress, and even worse, under chronic stress, our telomeres shorten. So I listened to the wise words that that woman told me, and believe you me, I've held on to them, and I'm now 61. She did everything that the doctors told her to do, except for one thing. She didn't do her arm exercises because she thought they were silly. Now, this is a woman who had the old total radical mastectomy, the Halsted radical removal of the breast, all of the skin, both chest muscles. They even cut out 2 of her ribs, and then took skin from her back to graft to close her chest. Took all of her lymph nodes out too, right down to her lung. And she said, I think it's silly, these exercises they want me to do. Walking up the walls with my fingers, I think that's silly. Taking a dowel stick and swinging it over my head, I think that's silly. Well, 5 weeks after her surgery, she didn't think it was that silly anymore because she could only raise her arm this high. Now, if she were alive today, I think we would find her at Curves. I just picture Miss Bertha there. But again, she didn't want anyone to know that she had had breast cancer, much less that she had had this type of horrific surgery. So she said to me, she said, I'm going to take up golf. I think that will help me to get my arm strength and range of motion back. She hired a private instructor, a young man named David, 25 years old. David thought she was interested in the sport, which she was not. She had a class with him every Wednesday, and just about every Saturday I got to see her. And she virtually told me the same thing each weekend. She'd say, well, David yelled at me again. He said, I'm not swinging my arm all the way through, but it really hurts to do that. I said, Miss Bertha, I think you should tell him you've had an operation. And she went, oh heavens, no, I wouldn't dream of telling this young man I've had surgery. I'll keep working at it, and eventually I'll be able to swing my arm all the way through. 8 weeks into her lessons, when I saw her that Saturday, she acted very different. She went, I did it, I finally did it. I made up my mind this past Wednesday that I wasn't going to be yelled at by David. She said, I connected with the ball. Both of my arms went all the way up, and I couldn't believe how far I made that ball go. Then I looked down and saw my breast prostheses at my feet. Because this was before we had mastectomy bras that had a pocket in them to keep them in place. And she said, when my arms went up, she said that daggone thing just flipped out. She said, we both stood there looking at it. She said, I didn't want to pick it up and claim it. She said, I was going to tell him it belonged to the people up ahead, but there were no people up ahead. She said, before I could make up a story as to what this object was, David reached down, picked it up, handed it to her, and said, why didn't you tell me you've had surgery? Is this why you've been having trouble with that arm? He made her feel very comfortable at a time, otherwise she would have felt very embarrassed. And I admire that man to this day, though I've never met him, for taking that very vulnerable moment and making her comfortable with it. David also turned her into a wonderful golf player, which was not one of her life goals. But within 3 years, Miss Bertha had trophies lined up on her mantle. And I really do think that each of them was courtesy of that dear man. Every Wednesday, I think she had her own little mini support group meeting out there on that golf course. She had a friend named Lena, a woman from Rochester, New York, originally where Miss Bertha was from. Miss Bertha and she usually got together over 4th of July weekend, but I noticed after Miss Bertha's surgery, Lena was driving down from New York, driving down to Maryland every other weekend, coming down on a Friday, going back on Monday mornings. And I thought that was odd because I didn't think that they were that close of friends until I was there on a weekend that Lena was also staying. Lena was also a breast cancer survivor. She was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. She survived 17 more years. She had breast cancer in both of her breasts, had bilateral total radicals mastectomies, ton of chemotherapy, ton of radiation. She was coming down to provide Miss Bertha support because this was long before we had any type of support programs either. When she heard what found out to Miss Bertha out on the golf course, and she went, oh, Bertha, I feel responsible for that. I should have explained to you, if you're not careful, these things will get away. And she knew it because it had happened to her. She was a gymnastics teacher, but not your typical gymnast. If you saw my mother or my daughter, both of my mom and daughter are 4'10" and 95 pounds. They look like little gymnasts. Lena was 6 feet tall and very large busted, so not your typical gymnast. But I actually got to see her do a gymnastics routine one time, and I was very impressed with how agile she was on her feet. She said, when I went back to work, she said, I had my prostheses. Now, 50 years ago, these things, quite frankly, looked like jellyfish. They had no shape to them. You ordered through a MedSearch catalog number 1, 2, or 3 by size, and they weren't sized very well either. She said, I was in the gym, 5th grade class of girls. I was showing them how to do a series of cartwheels. I got into my 3rd cartwheel, and both of my prostheses took off and skidded across the gym floor. She said, scared the girls to death. She said, I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to wear these in my bra, and I don't want to just have my husband's socks in my bra either. So she told us to keep in mind I was 12 when I heard this story. She said, I decided to drive it to New York City, where I found a very unique store that carried inflatable bras. And I'm thinking, wow, that's a really unique store. Well, now that I'm in my 60s, I know that every city has at least one of these stores. And they have other inflatable things in them too. There was Lena with her inflated bra on. And believe me, if you had seen her, you would never have guessed that she just had air on her chest. She always looked so lovely. And this one weekend when she came down, and I had the good fortune of also being there visiting Miss Bertha, she said, well, girls, since I was last here with you, I've had a very unique experience with my inflatable bra. I got on an airplane with it. She said, I saw all the usual signs. No smoking, wear your seatbelt, here's your flotation device in case the plane goes down. But nowhere was there a sign that said, if you're wearing an inflatable bra, we strongly recommend you partially deflate before takeoff, because if you don't, when we hit 25,000 feet, the sucker's going to explode. She said the plane took off and started climbing. She was talking to the strange man sitting next to her, telling him that she was traveling from Rochester to Chicago to help her brother move from an apartment into a house when her chest started vibrating. She said, I looked at my chest and he looked at my chest. She said, I attempted to continue the conversation, but it really didn't even matter because he was in shock. She said, before I could get my seatbelt off and get back to that bathroom, they both blew like a pair of bombs. She now scurries back to the lavatory, one part of an airplane that's never been improved, that little tiny space. She said, I took off my sweater, I took off my turtleneck, I took off my exploded bra to check the damages, major blowouts right through the nipple areas. She said, I sat down on the toilet seat, took the Kleenex out of the wall unit, stuffed it in through the holes, got out my little sewing kit out of my purse, stitched my nipples shut, reassembled myself, and decided I would go back to my seat and make believe nothing had happened. She said, I sat down and I attempted to pick up where I left off with my conversation. She said, but you know what? While I was in that bathroom, that man sitting next to me lost all peripheral vision and went deaf. He wasn't going to look at me. He wasn't going to listen to me. And she said, I chalked it up as a day in the life of a breast cancer survivor. I thought, good for Lena. And I never get on a plane, ever, 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 that I don't say, Lena, I'm thinking about you today, because you can't help but think about her when you're on a plane and they tell you how high you're climbing up. My next experience with breast cancer was as a student nurse. I began nursing school younger than most young women do today. I was 17. This was at a time we had patients sign an operative consent form to have a breast biopsy done under general anesthesia. While she was asleep, the tissue would be sent to pathology. If it contained breast cancer, she would remain asleep and have that total radical mastectomy, that old Halstead radical, just like Miss Bertha had. I was in the recovery room with a patient who had had such an experience. And while I was taking her blood pressure, I must have jostled her just enough that it caused her to awake. And she grabbed my arm and she said, please, please tell me my breast isn't gone. Please, please tell me he didn't take it off. And I froze because it was gone. This 17-year-old had no idea what to say. But my silence informed her of her worst fear was now a reality. And she started crying, and this 17-year-old started crying too. I was clueless what to do. An hour later, I had another patient in the recovery room. Her biopsy was benign. She awakened in the same way. Please, please tell me he didn't do a mastectomy to me. I said, no, ma'am. Both of your breasts are still there. And she said, oh, thank you, as if in some way this 17-year-old student nurse influenced the pathologist to write down the word benign. I called my mother long distance that night, and I said, you know, Ma, it's no wonder this is the most feared disease of all women. Look at the way we go about informing them that they've been diagnosed. She said, I predict at some point in time in your nursing career, you will have an opportunity to improve the experiences for women and men diagnosed with breast cancer to make it the least physically and emotionally traumatic that can be achieved for them. And little did I know, my mother was truly telling me what my future was going to be. I found a lump in my right breast when I was 38. I'd had a lump there before, and it had been a cyst, and I thought cysts have a tendency to refill, so that's probably what it is. But I called my gynecologist and saw him the following day. He said, yeah, I think that's what it is. Let's get you over to mammography, and they'll take a look. If it's a cyst, they'll drain it as they did before. And so over I went at Johns Hopkins at work. And they took an image and also did an ultrasound and said, yep, that cyst is refilled, put a needle in it, aspirated, it was gone. They said, but you know, you're between the age of 35 and 40 now. Let's go ahead and get a baseline of your left breast while you're here, because now we have a baseline of your right breast. So I said, okay, had that done. And there they saw something that they said, there's something on here that looks funny. I didn't feel anything, my GYN didn't feel anything, but I had 44 Ds on my chest then, so that was a whole lot of stuff to be feeling through. And they told me, they said, we actually think this probably warrants a biopsy. But 23 years ago, we still weren't doing the biopsies that we are today that are done right in breast imaging. So I selected my breast surgical oncologist. I met with him, and the following week I was in the operating room. I've had a very bad track record in my youth and halfway through my adult life with general anesthesia. I had been on respirators 5 different times from reacting to anesthesia. Not a good thing. So I knew I was going to be awake. My doctor wished he could have hit me with a hammer on the head because I talked the whole time asking questions, as oncology nurses have a tendency to do. During the procedure, he dropped me hints to let me know I was in very big trouble, and I chose to be in denial. He said, Lily, you have a very diseased breast. What I thought was something about the size of a walnut, I'm going to remove something that's more like a plum or an orange. And I'm like, wow. But all I could think about was 44 Ds, probably won't even notice the volume difference, not what's in it to be thinking about. So he said, I'm going to be out of the country for 5 days. I'm flying to Germany tomorrow to give a speech. I would like to be the one to review the pathology with you rather than one of my colleagues who you don't know as well as you know me. Are you okay waiting? I said, sure, Charlie. Well, my mother wasn't okay waiting. My mother's calling me each night. Do you know anything yet, honey? I said, no, Mom, the man's in Germany, won't be back for 5 days. Do you know anything yet, honey? No, Mom, the man's in Germany, won't be back for 4 days. I thought, why am I waiting for good news? I'm a nurse here at Johns Hopkins. I have access to the pathology database. I will pull up my pathology report, read it, call my mom, and relieve her mind. And I pulled up that report and read invasive breast carcinoma and DCIS, all 6 margins dirty. Holy schmoly. I logged off and logged back on, hoping that the computer would say, ha ha, fooled you, that'll teach you to look up your own report. But needless to say, it didn't. And I thought, oh my Lord, I have breast cancer. I knew my husband wasn't going to be getting home until about 11 o'clock that night. I got home from work around 7. And I thought, I just don't want to blurt out telling him that I have breast cancer when he comes to the door tonight. So I went in the bathroom and started practicing in front of the mirror how I was going to tell him. I thought, well, you know, I'm going to go all the way back and tell him, you know, the surgeon was dropping me some hints during the procedure, and I really wasn't interested in listening to them, and Mom's been calling each night, so I accessed the database, and here's the news. But I started looking around my bathroom while I'm practicing, and I thought, you know, I could be dead in a week. I better clean my house. There'd be a lot of people in here. So I spent 2 hours scrubbing my house. My house has not been that clean since either. And at 11 o'clock, the door opened, and through it came my husband, and he said, hey, babe, what are you doing still up? I said, I'm up to tell you I have breast cancer. What happened to my long rehearsal? And he went, what? Wait a minute, wait a minute. I thought the surgeon was away. So then I gave him the correct longer version. And he said, do you know how bad it is? I said, I should. I translate pathology reports for patients. But I was so petrified seeing my name, my history number, and those words about cancer, I didn't even print out a copy. And he said, that's okay. That's okay. He said, you and I have been married for 14 years. I know your zest for living and your strong willpower. We're going to hold on to one another, and we will do together whatever it is that we need to do with the goal of getting you better. My mother had called earlier. Do you know anything yet? And I was silent, just like I was when I was 17 in that recovery room. And she said, oh, honey, do you know something? And I said, Ma, I'm going to have Al call you back when he gets home, and it's going to be late. And I hung up. Thankful I didn't have to have eye contact with my mother. So she got a call from him at about midnight. Apparently she'd been crying ever since she called me. And he said, he also calls her Mom. He says, now, you know, Mom, he says, Lily's got good genes. She's got your genes and Frank's genes. He said, we're going to hold on to one another as a family, and we'll do what we need to do. But she was a mess, and I'd always known my mother to be a rock, so this was not what I expected to be happening with her. When my surgeon came back, I can't say he was thrilled I'd looked at my own report, though he didn't yell at me. He said, oh my gosh, so you had 3 days to worry and wonder what we need to do to get you better. He said, Lily, you have multicentric disease. And he said, because you have multiple tumors in the breast, it kind of looks like a solar system in there. He said, we're going to need to do a mastectomy. And at that time, sentinel node wasn't even on anybody's radar screen yet. So he said, also an axillary node dissection. And he said, because of your track record with general anesthesia, I'm not going to be able to put you completely under. And I said, I was afraid you were going to say something like that. So got scheduled for my surgery date. And I thought about Lena and I thought about Miss Bertha, but all that I thought about was that they were gone. And I forgot the words of wisdom these two incredible women had taught me, till it was time to sit down with our daughter, Laura, who ironically was 12 years old. Same age I was when I went through this with Miss Bertha. 2 questions I thought she would ask, because they're questions that patients have told me their own children have asked. And sure enough, she did. Mommy, are you going to die? I said, I don't think so. This looks like stage 1 or 2 breast cancer. I said, actually was identified with a mammogram. And I said, so I think the mammogram probably is saving my life. And she said, oh, good. She said, because I've already made Daddy's hair turn white, and if you weren't here, I think I'd make it fall out. I said, I think you're going to make it fall out anyway. Then she asked me, she said, did you get breast cancer because you had me? This is a question that children between the age of 4 and 12 oftentimes do worry about, but are not good about verbalizing to their parents. And I said, no, honey, actually having you reduce my risk of getting breast cancer, because I was 26 when you were born. And if a woman is under the age of 30 when she has her firstborn child, it actually reduces her risk of getting this disease. So she felt good about that. Then she asked me questions I had no pre-rehearsed answer for. She said, well, will the doctor let you bring your breast home to keep? After all, it isn't his, it's yours. You could put it in Daddy's big pickle jar and have it down on the mantle, and when you're sad, you could go down and look at it. I said to my husband, what do you think? We got your bluefish, your deer head, then my 44D in a pickle jar. So my husband said, I don't have a pickle jar big enough for that breast, to tell you that right now. So I told her, I said, I don't think it would make me feel better to bring it home. I'd rather leave the breast there at the hospital, and maybe the research doctors could use that breast tissue for research with the hope that one day other mommies wouldn't need to have mastectomy surgeries. She was happy with that answer. Then she said, well, will the doctor take your right breast and move it to the middle? I thought, read that consent form carefully. I could be Miss Uniboob, couldn't I? Oh my God. I said, no, honey, he's not planning on doing anything with the right one. Why do you think we should consider that? She said, well, Mommy, if he doesn't do that, you're going to lean to the right when you walk. So I showed her in a catalog what a breast prostheses look like, and I told her about mastectomy bras having pockets in them, and I told her about Lena, and I told her about Miss Bertha, and for the first time in several days, I laughed, and it felt so good to laugh again. She said, a bra with pockets, that's a very clever thing. She said, you know, Mommy, you always worry when you go to the ATM bank machine that afterwards someone's going to steal your money. You could put it in one of those pockets and then nobody could get it. And I said, well, yeah, I go from there to the grocery store, and when it's time to pay the bill, there could probably be a problem. My husband said, I think she gave you an excellent recommendation. I hate waiting in those long lines with you at the grocery store. You could start getting your money out, and we can make an express line wherever we want to. And what Laura did for us, without realizing it, because to her these questions were very serious questions, she found our sense of humor. And my husband and I made a pact that every day from that day forward, we would find something funny about the fact that I had been diagnosed. And believe me, we have stuck to that pact. Thank you. I did worry a bit, though, about my sexuality and my body image and how things were going to turn out when we were intimate after having this kind of a surgery. I saw my doctor the day before my surgery. Had a page and a half of typed out questions. Oh boy. Well, right before I went to the surgeon, my husband said to me, you and I are going to be fine, you know that, right? We're going to be just fine. And I said, I want to make a trade with you. And he knows if I say that, he's going to get the short end of the stick in his opinion. And he said, oh dear, what do you want? I said, I want to choose the moment when you see me with one breast, and I don't know when that moment will be, but I'm going to wait a while. And at that moment, I want to see you without your dentures, because my husband has false teeth. I had never seen those teeth out of his head. 14 years we were married, never saw those teeth out of his head. He looked at me horrified. He said, you want me to feel more vulnerable than you? I said, no, I want you to feel equally vulnerable to me. He said, is it that important to you? And I said, it is. And he went, oh my God, okay. And we shook hands on it. And I slept better knowing I would control that moment. Saw my surgeon 2 hours later. He went through all the questions with me and he said, you know, you and Al, I think, are going to be fine. Do you think you're going to be fine? I said, I think I will hopefully survive this disease, yes. And he said, I'm talking about you and Al. He said, I realize part of your self-image is tied up here on your chest. He said, we pick you out of a crowd here based on they'll go over to the woman with the large breast, she'll help you. And I said, well, I'm going to wait a while before I let him see me. And he said, define for me a while. I said, I think maybe 6 or 8 weeks. And he went, And if your surgeon ever goes, beware of what he could be planning for you. That night before the surgery, we were watching Primetime Live, which was a brand new program on television. They were interviewing a couple. This young man was a baseball player, and he was as amazing as we feel Al Ripken Jr. for the Baltimore Orioles has been. He was a pitcher, an incredible pitcher, and he got bone cancer in his pitching arm of all places. He had had surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, and it was a miracle he got to go back to the game. On national television, his first game back, when he threw his second pitch, he fell to the ground. Pathological fractures in that arm. This disease was back with a vengeance. He ended up having a 4-quarter amputation. His shoulder and arm were gone. The reporter said, you must be devastated that your baseball career is over. How sad for you. He goes, I'm not devastated. My baseball career was merely part of my journey to carry me to what my true destiny is for living on this earth. Because now I travel around the country and go to pediatric oncology units where I visit children who are battling cancer who want to get well to grow up to become baseball players. That's why I'm here. That is my purpose. The reporter asked his wife, he must be dependent on you for everything, to cut up his food, to help him get dressed. She interrupted the reporter and said, he's only dependent on me for my love, and gee, he is easy to love. Excuse me. My husband looked at that television screen and said, soon that's going to be you and me. And I said, I agree. I think it will be. We had to get up at 4 in the morning in order to get to the hospital on time. And we wondered, is there something we should do with this breast before we leave? Should we take a picture of it? Should we pray over it? Is there something you should do? And in the process of trying to figure out what to do, we ran out of time and didn't do anything. But I think in retrospect, I would have probably taken a photograph. On the way to the hospital, I said out loud in the car, this is an ungodly hour to get up to have your breast amputated. And my husband said, oh baby, we agreed today's a good day, it's a positive day, you're ridding your body of the source of this disease, you're sailing way up that survival curve, today's a good day. I thought, all right, I'll think this to myself then. It's an ungodly hour to get up to have this surgery done. We got to the hospital, it was 5:30 in the morning. He dropped me off at the entrance, he said, I'll be in 5 minutes, I'm parking right across the street. As I'm walking in the hospital, still thinking this ungodly thought, coming down the hallway towards me was Clyde Schallenberger, our hospital chaplain. Now, we have 51,000 employees at Johns Hopkins, and to find him in the hallway at 5:30 in the morning was a miracle. He says, Lily, what are you doing here ahead of your work schedule? And you don't look like you're dressed for work. I said, well, you're here ahead of schedule too, you tell me first. He says, well, my boss, the big G, does this man have a sense of humor? He said he called me this morning at 2:30 a.m. and asked if I could come in to be with a family who had a loved one in the surgical intensive care unit. They had to make decisions within the hour for their loved one, and I helped them with those decisions, and I think they've made wise decisions. He said, I was going to go home and get some more sleep, but I decided to detour through labor and delivery and had perfect timing because I got to see a brand new life brought into this world. And it energized me in such a way I thought, I don't need any more sleep. I am high on life. I came down here because the cafeteria is opening. I was going to get coffee and a bagel when I run into you. Now, why are you here ahead of schedule? And you sure don't look like you're dressed for work. So I told him what was happening, and he said, well, the Johns Hopkins grapevine failed me. I had not heard that you had been diagnosed and was having surgery today. And he said, I'm going to have a meeting with my boss, the Big G, and we will discuss you, and I will then come and find you later in the day. With that, my husband was there, and I introduced him to Clyde, and I said to my husband, you were right and I was wrong. It is not the ungodly hour, it is the perfect hour. When I got to upstairs into the surgical suite area and the surgeon came out and said, it's time, my husband kissed me, told me he loved me, and he said to the surgeon, bring her back to me after you've done her transformation surgery. Because that's what my husband called it. And that's what I tell each patient I have the privilege to escort into the operating room, that yes, you and I in this room have had transformation surgery. That while I was there on the OR table, that surgeon was carrying me way up that survival curve. I was exchanging my breast for another chance at life, and that truly was a fair trade. When I was brought into the recovery room, they already had my husband in the room waiting for me. He stood at the foot of my gurney. He said, oh, baby, the transformation surgery was successful. I love you. But we realized in retrospect, nobody else knew what we were talking about, and I've always worried somebody might have thought I had a sex change done that day. I thought, oh my God. I actually wanted to go home that day. I'm a control freak. I want to control as much as I possibly can, and I knew at home I could, and staying in the hospital I couldn't. But I had problems with nausea and vomiting, and they said, you can't go home. So I was admitted to an inpatient unit. My husband stayed with me until just about 10 p.m. And that was the first time, the first moment I was alone to think about what all was happening to me. All through the evening, my evening shift nurse, Mikey, who I'd never met before and have never seen since, was in and out of the room. I had hemovacs then instead of the Jackson Pratts, these big clumsy hemovacs. She was emptying those. I was keeping track of my own nausea, vomiting on a paper towel, having my husband empty my Mises basin. And she'd come in, she'd rehang an IV bag and check my drains or empty them. And she would say, how are you, Mrs. Shockney? And I would say, I'm fine. She'd leave, hour later she'd be back, how are you, Mrs. Shockney? I'd say, I'm fine. But after my husband left, I wasn't fine. I'd been holding it together for him and for her, who I didn't even know. She came back in at 10 minutes to 11, right before change of shift, going on for evening to night shift. And I was laying there thinking, oh dear God, I can see my toes on my left foot I have not seen since I was 12. Didn't even know they were down there. And I'm thinking, I don't know how big the biggest tumor is. I don't know the status of my lymph nodes. I don't know what my future holds, but I have a 12-year-old to raise. She came in, hung a new IV, checked my intake and output sheet, emptied my hemovac, and again said, how are you, Mrs. Shockney? And I again said, fine. And she paused and put the side rail down. And she sat on the side of the bed next to me and got her face right in front of me. Because all evening, whenever she came in, I looked away. Now we have eye contact. How are you? And I started to cry. I said, I have no idea how I got to this side of the side rail, but let me tell you something, it is very, very scary over here. And I rambled and rambled to her, telling her I've got a child to raise. I don't know what lies ahead. I must have thought that by being an oncology nurse, I would be immune to getting cancer in some way. I'm scared to death. She sat there holding my hand, never took her eyes off of mine, listened to me intently, letting me ramble for 20 minutes. It's now 10 minutes after 11. My door opened, and through it stood the unit clerk. Mikey, you're late for giving report. She never turned around to acknowledge her. She never took her hand off mine. She never left her eyes from looking at me. She said, tell them to wait. I'm taking care of my patient. That nurse, Mikey, is the epitome of what I expect all oncology nurses to be, or anybody in the oncology field, quite frankly. She gave me what she had the least to give. She gave me her time. And I returned to that unit 3 weeks later when I went back to work, and I wanted to hug her, only to find out that she wasn't there anymore. And I said, has she transferred to another unit? No, she's actually out on disability. I said, what do you mean? And the nurse manager, who I knew, said, you may not have noticed, Lily, that she walked with an ataxic gait. I said, I didn't notice, because whenever she came in, I looked away. And she said she has a neuromuscular disorder that has picked up so much speed, she's had to leave the profession. I was devastated, absolutely devastated. I thought, oh, this is wrong. But what I do is that I do let you know about Mikey. And Mikey and I have remained in touch via letter. Her husband has to do these letters because she's not able to hold a pen in her hand anymore. And 6 of my 14 books, Mikey is in them. I've also published 7 articles just about Mikey. So we all should expect, and we deserve to have a Mikey in our life. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't want to miss a moment of my life. I thought, I'm so in touch with my mortality, I want to embrace it. And I watched the sun as it rose in my window, and I thought, how many times have I been driving to work at this hour? The sun is rising, and I'm sitting at a traffic light, and I glance over, there's the sun coming up, it's beautiful, but I'm back there looking at that light tapping my foot. Come on, light change, come on, light change. Because the sun will be there tomorrow, I'll look at it then. I suddenly realized, yeah, the sun will be there, but I might not be there to see the sun. So I was it was an epiphany for me. My surgeon told me he was going to be coming in at 9 a.m. to do a dressing change, and that after that I would be able to go home. But my door opened at 6 a.m. and through it first came my husband. And I said, honey, you were way too early. I can't go home yet. And he went, oh, couldn't sleep. Bed didn't feel the same without you in it. And I thought, why you're laying like a bump if I could be with you? I said, but you don't have a special security pass this morning to be with me. And he went, another. With that, 5 minutes after 6, the door opened again, and through it came my surgeon, who did not look surprised my husband was there. And the surgeon said, isn't it wonderful that Al is here nice and bright and early to help me do your first dressing change? That was not the deal, was it? That was not the trade. But I felt like I was in a nightmare trying to run from the dragon and your feet don't work, or you try to scream out for help and there's no sound. But I knew I was awake. My surgeon had me sit on the side of the bed. My surgeon sat beside me and leaned over just a little bit in front. He told my husband to get on his knees directly in front of me. My husband's head was maybe a foot from my dressings. And as the surgeon peeled back those dressings and I felt the coolness of the air on my chest, I thought, I've never been this naked in my entire life. I was so scared. And I'm looking at his face, and I really wasn't sure what I was going to see, but he gave me this big smile. And he says, baby, you look fine. You're my transformed woman. We're going to be fine. We're going to be just fine. And I still couldn't speak, because if I could have, I would have said, take out your teeth. We've been married 37 years. I still haven't seen him without his teeth. As you might surmise, after I left the doctor's office the day before the surgery, he called my husband. He said, she's going to wait way too long for you to be allowed to see her, and I don't think that's a good idea. I'm going to jumpstart the intimacy for the two of you, and she's going to be mad. But I think it's the right thing to do. And I think I was mad at them maybe 20 minutes, and I thought, yeah, he did do the right thing. So I went home with my 2 hemovacs, we called our booby traps, and 6 weeks after my surgery, I was eligible to be fitted for my breast prostheses, and I took my mom with me. And I said, you know, Mom, she's kind of like a puppy. She's going to be my bosom buddy. I'm going to take her everywhere I go. I think we should give her a name before we pick her up. So we selected the name Betty Boob, and I wore her out of the store like a child wearing new shoes. I also sent out adoption notices to my best friends I had gotten her. My husband thought, oh my God, they've operated on her brain. One of my girlfriends mailed her a gift. So it was to Lily Shakti, to Betty Boob in care of Lily Shakti with my address. In the box was a ceramic Christmas ornament in the shape of a baby bottle, and inscribed on it, it says, Betty Boob's First Christmas, 1992. I have it in the living room, hanging up. We decided that was a good substitute for my breast being in the pickle jar. Absolutely, absolutely. I had a few more bumps in the road after I finished my treatment. And at the age of 40, I was diagnosed with my other breast. If we had had breast MRI way back then, they would have done an MRI and they would have seen all of that. It's just the improvements in medicine that others, thank God, are able to benefit from. And sure enough, I had multicentric disease, so I needed to undergo a second mastectomy. And I thought about Lena and I thought about Bertha, and I thought I'm just going to, pull up my bootstraps and take this on again, and so I did. So we had a naming contest for the roommate, and that's how we called people to tell them. We didn't say, Lily's diagnosed with breast cancer again. It's, we found out today Betty Boop is getting a roommate. We want you to help us select a name. And it neutralized the discussion about talking about cancer. So people will call and say, when is Betty Boop getting her roommate? How are you and Betty Boop doing? So one day I want to learn ventriloquism. I think if our breasts could speak like the crash dummies do, we could get more women to get mammograms and do breast self-exams and such. It's one of my life goals. 12 years ago, I had an unusual gift presented before me, and it was the option of choice. Because of the improvements in medicine and power of science, a new anesthetic agent was now available, and I was tested with it because I needed to have a D&C done. And they said, this one you're going to do fine with. Suddenly, the opportunity for reconstruction now was presented, because it wasn't an option before. Believe you me, you can't have reconstruction done under local anesthetic. So I felt guilty even thinking about it. I thought, here I'm the advocate for doing reconstruction for our patients. I tell them, you were born with two breasts, you have the right to still have two breasts. But there was no Lily Shockney as a patient advocate to talk to Lily Shockney. So I asked my husband, what do you think? And he said, well, don't do it for me. I think you and I are doing fine. I said, you're right, we are doing fine. Talked to my daughter, who at that time was in her early 20s, and she said, Ma, it scares me even to think about you having surgery, and this is elective, don't do it, don't do it. So I went to church by myself on a Friday evening. Church was empty, sat on the back pew by myself. And I said out loud, I said, God, you give me a sign, if it's okay with you, that I pursue breast reconstruction. And if you never give me a sign, that's fine. Because Betty Boop and Bobby Sue, my Boopsie twins, and we're doing fine. Well, as I left the church, I thought, I'm not telling anybody what I've done this evening, because I think I might be a little whacked. I didn't think I'd see a burning bush or be hit by lightning or something. But I got out to the car and got in the car and turned on the ignition. My car radio was on. And I heard a song I hadn't heard for more than 15 years on the regular radio. And the song was Sexual Healing by Marvin Gaye. And the first full verse I heard was, I can't wait for you to operate. I'm your medicine, let me in. I got home and I said to my husband, God just sang Sexual Healing to me on my car radio. I am going to have the reconstruction done. And he thought I had lost my mind. On the day of this very big surgery called deep flap, taking my abdominal fat, cutting it free from my body, transplanting it up to my chest, connecting blood vessels the size of pencil lead, everyone in that operating room, operating on me, taking care, knew me, works with me, and frankly loves me. I thought, wow, how hard is it to disassemble or reassemble somebody you love? So I typed up 3 signs that I taped to my torso underneath my hospital gown, give them a little comic relief for the morning. My right mastectomy incision, the sign said, please supersize me. On my left one, it said, I'm here for a front-end realignment. And on my navel, it said, Dear Santa, thanks for bringing me cleavage for Christmas, because it was Christmas week. And they said that it did give them the laughter that they needed. When I woke up many hours later, my mother said, I put my hands up here and said, the girls are back. I got to steal second base, and thus became the title of the book that I'll be signing later. So I went home with the girls, and Al and I promptly started honeymooning with the girls, and he was telling everybody about what my new breasts look like, and I thought, isn't this just between you and me? He wrote on the calendar, nipples coming, like they were going to fly in or something. And my husband's a hiney man, so I didn't understand this nipple thing. And he would say, 3 more weeks, you have nipples. Yeah. 2 more weeks, the nipples will be here. Right. So on the day of the surgery, I try to be very efficient. I was having this done between morning and afternoon clinic. I knew I would walk in the OR, walk out of the OR. It would be less than 30 minutes. We call it the Dr. Jiffy Boo procedure because it takes 11 minutes per side. You can't get your oil changed in 22 minutes. I sure can't. My phone rang, though, at 10:30 in the morning, and I answered it. And this person says, is this Mrs. Shockney? I said, yes. Your husband's been brought into the emergency room with chest pain, can you come down here? I said, oh my God, yes. And then this man says, we understand you're getting nipples today. I'll be right down. Oh my God. I get down there, and he's had 2 heart attacks, so I was like, holy schmoly. There's our cardiologist standing there. We now share a cardiologist, as a matter of fact. And he's laying there on the gurney, and all the EKG leads are on, and the monitor and everything, and oxygen, and the doctor's going, getting your nipples done today, huh? I said, well, I was going to, but I think I'll postpone that if you think he's in trouble here. I think he's just a little overexcited about you getting your nipples. I think this is just angina, but we are going to keep him. We're going to put him up in the CCU. Come back to him with the nipples. Don't cancel it. I said, all right. I go into him, he goes, you're still getting your nipples today, aren't you? Yes, but please stop talking about it to everybody. So I went back over, finished morning clinic, got my nipples, went back over later in the day. They put him in CCU room number 9, and I go in the door. He's on the monitor. I see the monitor overhead. Of course, the monitor is also out at the nurse's desk. And what's he say? Let me see them. And what does this idiot do? I hoist up everything, I peel back the dressings, and his monitor went off. Before I could get anything put away, the crash cart and the CPR team was in the room. I don't know any of them. And this one resident says, what the hell's going on in here? And another resident, again, I didn't know, said, oh, didn't you hear she had nipples done today? Well, why don't we just announce it over the intercom? Come to CCU room number 9 if you want to see a new set of nipples. Good God. So, and thank God he was okay, but I certainly learned a lot. That I guess he just wasn't into high knees. There's something to do with nipples too I had no idea about. So my life has progressed on, and I then ended up in the hands of GYN oncology 8 years ago. Had a really big 9-hour surgery, big case. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. My husband typed up a sign for that surgery. It was done abdominally and vaginally. I thought, oh my God, I don't even want to picture what that looks like. But he typed up a sign that he put in my crotch and told me not to touch, that I'll find out later what it says, and it said, if you break it, you bought it. 7 years ago, my husband was diagnosed with melanoma. I actually diagnosed him. I said, tomorrow is take your husband to work day and find a surgical oncologist who specializes in melanoma day. So he even has a more profound understanding of that, being in touch with your mortality. And I'll close with the saying that I read on a bathroom wall. You usually can't repeat graffiti you read in a bathroom, but this one you can. And I actually did some homework and found out that the original author of it was Eleanor Roosevelt. And it said, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That's why we call it the present. Thank you very much. Sure.
I was asking Lily if she felt like some questions. She's such a trooper. Her flight got in at 1:30 this morning.
Yeah, I got
Delayed.
here, got into the bed at 3:30. Yeah, it was an interesting 24 hours.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Oh my
Oh,
goodness,
sure.
I'll make some closing comments at the end, but do we have some questions? We have about 10 minutes that we can take questions from Lily. Anyone? Stand up. You're gonna have to project and then I'll repeat the question. Do you want to repeat that?
That's a great question. The question is about my daughter, who's now 35, and what impact did this have on her, and have I gone through genetics and such? So great question. When she turned 15 was when the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene tests became available from Myriad Genetics, and I enthusiastically said to her, oh, they've got this blood test that I can do to find out if I carry a gene, and she put her hands on mine and said, "Mommy, please don't yet. Please let me be a teen for a little while longer. I just got my breasts." Wow. That was a significant thing for me to understand. And I said, "You're right. You let me know when you're ready to know." When she turned 21, actually on her birthday, she said, "I'd like to know." I'm a firm believer in going through genetic counseling before testing, because even if someone tests negative, that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a gene that we don't have a way of testing for yet. And that was actually my situation. They said, "We think you do have a gene, though you tested negative for BRCA1 and BRCA2. They later, after the GYN oncology surgery, they also tested me for Cowden's syndrome gene. If you're not familiar with that one, it is breast, uterine, and thyroid together. My mother also has had uterine, and her only siblings had thyroid. And but they told me, so we think you have a gene. We think that when your parents married, they created a gene. My father had many generations of prostate. He actually died of his metastatic disease last year. And my mother had 3 generations of uterine. So they think when they married, that is what happened. And so my daughter says, "Mom, you're a mutant." The healthiest person I know is my daughter. I have never witnessed anyone who does as much as she possibly can to maintain good health. It's like if you looked up, healthiest person in the world, her picture should be in the dictionary. It's quite amazing. One of the things that I learned, and it is something that I do talk to patients about because I think it's important, how we deal with breast cancer, how we deal with any really big medical crisis, or any crisis for that matter, but I'll stick with medical today. Our children are watching. We may not realize just how much they're watching. They're taking all this in. And I tell patients, you need to step up to the plate and be strong for your children, because you're teaching them how to deal with a medical crisis when it's their turn. And trust me, it will be their turn in some way, shape, or form. The latest statistics that were released the beginning of February for the United States, last year it was 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will develop a life-threatening cancer in their lifetime. Those numbers changed a month and a half ago for the announcement. It's 1 in 2 people, so 1 in 2 women now. That's an awful lot of people. Think about the number of baby boomers that there are in this world right now. That's a lot of people who are going to be facing cancer, and many, many, many of them are going to end up with breast cancer. She has begun having breast imaging done. We took my age at first diagnosis, which was 38, subtracted 10, which was 28. That is the age that she began having actually breast MRI. And she's had 1 scare, which thank God ended up being benign. I do know God has a sense of humor. I have a wonderful grandson who was then followed 2 years later with a wonderful granddaughter. My granddaughter, Kira, was born with a 3rd nipple. And I'm like, am I supposed to laugh about this? I'm trying to. Yeah. And I believe that Kira, who is 6 now, her generation is the generation that will be able to say, my mom had breast cancer long before I was ever born. But there's a vaccine now for my children, so it will be impossible for them to get breast cancer. That's where we are in research. When I feel down, if we have a patient that I'm very attached to who has lost her life to this disease, I go over to our research building and say, show me something that will amaze me. I need to be amazed today. And they always can. And I thought, yeah, we are going to figure this out. This disease isn't one kind of breast cancer or even 20 kinds of breast cancer. Within breast cancer, there's more than 1,000 different iterations of it, and that's what makes it so daggone complicated. We've also learned that 22% of the time when the breast cancer leaves the breast to go on to other organ sites, it's a chameleon and it will convert its prognostic factors. So if it was ER positive, it can be ER negative. HER2 negative, it can be HER2 positive. So we make sure we biopsy those spots and relook at those prognostic factors, or we may be doing all the wrong treatments. So it's a sneaky kind of a disease, sneakier than what we, I think, had an appreciation for. Other questions?
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? She has
There's
another
hand
one.
up there. Ooh, so, yeah, so you obviously are high risk with grandmother and mother, having been previously diagnosed, and that does meet the criteria for breast MRI. So ask your GYN about that.
Any additional questions from anyone? There's one over
Oop,
there.
over
Yeah.
here. So I will frankly tell you that you are high risk. You share her genetic makeup identically. And we've actually studied twins at Hopkins. It's about a 60% probability that you'll get breast cancer, not that you will die of it. And you should be in a high-risk program. You should be followed and seen every 6 months. I wouldn't ask him. I'm telling him that you will be getting an MRI and to fill out this requisition. Yeah.
So being the advocate for yourself.
Yeah, the insurance companies are to follow the high-risk criteria that was developed by ASCO and endorsed by NCCN, National Comprehensive Cancer Network, that sets the standards of care for the nation. So let me make a comment regarding your sister. My specialty actually is metastatic breast cancer. I am heavily involved with our patients in that regard. I hold retreats twice a year for patients. They come from all over the country. I had a couple flying from India. They're free to attend. They're 3 days and 2 nights. One is for couples, so the patient brings her spouse or partner. The other is for women not in a relationship, and they bring a female caregiver. I have boxes and boxes of cards there that I've had donated, that I've had made by scrapbook clubs. We just did an amazing community service event at a high school 2 weeks ago where I brought together, they have a little club. There's supposed to be only 14 girls. We had 65 girls in the room, which is amazing. And they all brought their mothers. And I had 12 breast cancer survivors there who are on our volunteer team. And I said, if your mother was going to die tomorrow of breast cancer, none of the mothers had breast cancer, by the way, but if your mother was going to die of breast cancer, she'd be missing your graduation that comes up in May. She will miss when you walk down the aisle. She will miss when you give birth to your first child. What do you want to see on the front of a card that she's going to write inside of it, that you will receive after she is gone? So she's still right here instilling her hopes and love and wise words of wisdom to you. And so they made these incredible cards. I take these boxes of cards to those retreats and have the patients who do have children or grandchildren, please select these cards, because this is a way you can still be here instilling your values in your children, and your children will feel your presence with them. So in last June, a young woman called me. She said, I've never met you, but you took care of my mother 14 years ago when I was 10, and that's how old I was when my mother died of breast cancer. She said she was in and out of the hospital a lot. She said she'd come home and she'd say, Lily said to do this and Lily said to do that, but I didn't know who Lily was or what you were telling her till after she had died. And she said, my Aunt Sarah has been the keeper of the cards. She said, for my communion, there was a card. When I got my driver's license, there was a card. Sweet 16th birthday, there was a card. And she said, I got married 3 weeks ago. And she said, when Aunt Sarah put my veil on my head, she handed me a card for my mother. And she said the envelope had yellowed because it was 14 years old. And she said it was a beautiful card, and I opened it up, and there's my mother's handwriting on the left-hand side. She wrote at the top, I know you would have chosen wisely who was deserving of having you spend the rest of your life with. In the middle, she wrote advice, marital advice. Don't ever go to bed angry with one another. Whatever it is can be talked through. The bottom left-hand corner said, when your dad lifts your veil and kisses your left cheek, you will feel me kiss your right. And she said, Miss Lily, I've tracked you down to tell you I felt my mother's kiss. I have always felt her presence through these cards. Thank you for having her do that for me 14 years ago. So she said, I haven't had the nerve to ask Aunt Sarah, is that my last card? I said, it is not. I said, if you choose to have a family, there's a baby shower card, and there's a card for when you hold that baby the first time in your arms, what your mother felt like when she held you. So if your sister has children, grandchildren, I'm going to assign you the task, if you will, of getting cards for her, because it's so impactful to those that she leaves behind.
Wow. At this point, we have to stop the questions.
Now I
You'll
feel
have
like I should do a little dance to get everybody to
talk to
feel
Lily.
better.
Yes, please. So, thank you so very much for sharing, your inspiring story and reminding each of us really to both maintain faith but our sense of humor. I think those are definitely words that we should all live by. I think we should each have a Miss Lena or Miss Bertha to help guide our path to our destiny, and I would hope that we should all have a Mikey in our life to take care of us at the time when we need care. I was fortunate. I lost my sister to ovarian cancer just 7 years ago, my mother to ovarian cancer before that, my brother to lung cancer just 3 years ago. And we were blessed by nurses much like Mikey, who took the time not only with my brother and my sister, but took the time with each of us as family members to provide that level of care. And I know many of the healthcare people in this audience are just that type of nurse and other healthcare professionals. So I want to thank you for that. Although I'll never be able to listen to Marvin Gaye the same way. Anyway, so just a couple things as a reminder. Lily will be signing copies of her book, Stealing Second Base, during the upcoming break, and again at the break just before lunch. Just a couple quick additional housekeeping things. My mistake, Bridget, who's my coordinator, would tell me to stay on script because I misidentified our Medford group. We're not at Providence this year, we're at Asante, so they share. So I apologize to my colleagues in Southern Oregon for that error. We're now going to take a 30-minute break. The breakout sessions will reconvene at 10:15. On the front of your notebooks or your folders that you received today is your schedule. Breakout sessions are being held in rooms Adams and Jefferson and Roosevelt, which are in the Executive Meeting Center, which is past registration just before you come to the front lobby check-in and to the left. And then in the Three Sisters and Mount Bachelor room upstairs, and then we also have a session back in this room. There's guidepost signs and Komen staff and volunteers are going to assist you to find your way. Other housekeeping, restrooms are available to the right of the ballroom. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask Komen staff. We'll be back in this room at 12 noon for our lunch program. And I just want to encourage you again to visit the exhibitors and make sure you come and sign, have Lily sign your book for you. So thank you.